Good morning, everyone, and welcome to First Draft, where I talk with journalists and authors about their important work and the stories behind them. I'm Susan Demas, the executive editor here at Lincoln Square. And I am so excited to bring back Jennifer Schulze, a fellow Chicagoan. Jennifer is a longtime journalist who has been an executive at several TV stations and the Chicago Sun-Times. She writes the Indistinct Chatter Substack about the media, which you should definitely subscribe to. And her work can also be found on The Contrarian. Jennifer, welcome back.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, you've written several columns for us over the last few months, and I want to jump into some of those as well as a recent column that you wrote for The Contrarian. But why don't we start with probably the biggest media story that we've had recently, which is the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And the controversy of this started well before there was an attempted shooting there, of course, with the fact that Donald Trump announced that for the first time as president, he would be attending. And the red carpet was literally rolled out for him by the Correspondents Association, which has been the subject of a lot of hostility from both Trump and his administration. So as somebody who is a well-established observer and critic of the media, I really wanted to know what your thoughts were on all of this.
Well, I would say I was in the camp of don't have it. Don't have it. And then when they were having it, don't go. That said, I recognize that the power dynamic with the White House Correspondents Association is off kilter, not just with the president, being the all powerful, you can and cannot come into my briefings, you're banned and I'm coming after you and all that, but also the corporate ownership of media. I do think it's really hard. I suspect it's really hard for individual journalists to stand up and say, I'm not going to this dinner with the president when the people that own their company and are signing their checks are having fancy dinners for him and writing him big bribery checks, I think. And so once they decided to go ahead with it, I wasn't going to say, you're bad for going. I appreciate that power dynamic. I think it's a really tough situation that people are in when your owners don't have your back and your owners are kowtowing to the president for you to be this, $60,000 a year or whatever it is, reporter saying, I'm going to take a stand. You might not, Mr. Big Boss, Mr. Big CEO, but I'm going to be the one that takes the stand. I think that's a lot to ask.
Yeah. We've seen that this president has been hostile to the press long before he was ever in office. That marked his first term. He routinely calls out reporters by name at his rallies. He calls them out on Twitter, which leads to a lot of harassment campaigns. He's called the press Lugenpress, which of course is a Nazi term. So he brings all that baggage into his second term. But I feel like this time around has been really different because of those corporate relationships, because you have these mega mergers, like with the Ellisons acquiring CBS and totally changing CBS News. Now they are trying to acquire Warner Brothers, which would mean a whole other slate of companies, Discovery, HBO, CNN, which Trump and his administration have talked about at length, that this is a property they want in right-wing hands. And so now that you have this dynamic where you have corporations that are trying to find favor with this administration, that are trying to openly push an ideology that is in keeping with this White House, how does that change the role of the free press in our democracy when we have all of these corporate owners that aren't just willing to play ball with the Trump administration, but they're willing to change coverage for him.
Well, it's a hot mess. I mean, like I said earlier, the power dynamic has changed dramatically, and the work has changed, the motivation has changed, the threat level has changed. I know lots of folks are really critical, and I am among them, of the DC press corps. Um, I think I think we have to, if we ever get through this, and I hope we will, we have to step back and rethink and redo. I've long decried the corporate ownership of these media companies, and I think you and I have talked about this before. You know, we didn't have some of these problems when TV news organizations or network news organizations or even newspapers were a small part of a company as opposed to just a standalone business, right? You know, Disney, I mean, I think ABC is really important to them. And we saw that with the Kimmel, all the pushback on the Kimmel, that first round of Kimmel. And they did back off on that. But at the same time, they've got all these other businesses, and the news is really, it's not that a priority for them. And that's the case across the board with so many companies. I think we need a rethinking, and I'm just so happy that independent media is stepping up and filling some of these important gaps, these coverage gaps. And I'd like to see more of that. But there is a David and Goliath thing happening here. There's so much independent media. A lot of it, is just scraping by. It is making a difference, and that's great. But I think everything, like I said, it's a hot mess.
Yeah.
And I think we might see some signs of things improving, but I am worried that we're going to kind of be in this really complicated period for a while, especially as long as Trump is putting, is so dominant and so. I don't know, is he scaring these owners? Maybe. Whatever he's doing to get them to capitulate to him, that's not going to stop for a while.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk a little more about CBS News, because obviously there's a storied history there. It's the home of Walter Cronkite, was known as the Tiffany Network for years. Mm-hmm. And now CBS News looks very different under Bari Weiss. She's a former New York Times columnist who quit in a huff several years ago. And she is now at the helm of CBS News after running the Free Press, a conservative publication on Substack. CBS News looks a lot different these days in terms of their coverage of the White House, their tone. They definitely seem to be courting that Fox News conservative audience. And there have been a number of people who have quit. There have been layoffs. It doesn't sound like a very stable operation. And I know, Jennifer, you have written extensively about this. So tell us about what your take is, where CBS News is right now, and why should this be so important to people?
Well, CBS News has been a part of America for 100 years. It's been a reliable source of information for people. Let's not forget that it's free, no paywall. You just need a TV and you can turn it on. And if you have the internet, you can go and see whatever they're doing online. But, free news coverage is not easy to find in America. It's also traditionally been middle of the road. I've never bought into the idea that it had a liberal bias. Anyone who actually watches it is about as straight down the middle as you can get. And so it was a reliable place for people to go. And I think what's happened, I think the external changes, if you're a viewer, I think the changes are somewhat subtle, except for the big blow-ups, right? So day to day, I think it's subtle on CBS to see how much of an editorial shift there has been. It's the case where recently the excessive editing of Trump on 60 Minutes,
Right.
that. Now, if you were watching Trump that day, you wouldn't know it, but the news coverage of it was pretty excessive. It's those kinds of things. It's those, like when Tony DeCoppel praised Marco Rubio, that's really unusual.
Florida man.
Yeah, and so those things have really broken through, and the audience is running away from CBS News in a way that I don't know how they recover from that. But here's the thing. I don't think the oligarchs that own it care about that. I have long said, and I'm not alone in this, that I think this has always been a political strategy, not a business strategy. This has been politics to keep Donald Trump happy, to quiet the right-wing criticism so that the Ellisons, David and Larry, father and son, could buy the things they wanted to buy and grow bigger. I think they're putting Barry Weiss in this job was obviously on purpose, but particularly that she has no broadcasting experience. They do not care about that. They didn't hire her to make CBS better, to bring in more viewers. They hired her to, go a little bit more right wing, keep Donald Trump happy, just make the right get the right less angry about CBS. And listen to the FCC chair. I like what they're doing, you hear Brendan Carr say with some frequency. So mission accomplished. Do they care that the ratings are going? No, they don't. I don't think they do.
Well, to your point, CBS News is such a minute part of the Ellison's business. So, that's never the network news is never going to be a huge moneymaker for these multi business corporations out there. But it seems like in particular now, with what we've seen with Washington Post, I mean, obviously Jeff Bezos, his fortune does not rise and fall on the Washington Post. It's on Amazon, and that is his primary business. And so he has shown absolutely no mercy with cutting like half of his newsroom. And obviously that has made Trump happy. He was a target during the first term where Trump kept threatening him because of the business relationship that Amazon has with the U.S. Postal Service. He seems to have been very successful with some of his contributions to Trump during the inauguration and with the cuts to the Washington Post. But what does this mean for journalism when you have such esteemed operations? I mean, the Washington Post has won so many Pulitzers. CBS News has done such important work over the years, covering wars and covering domestic policy. What does that mean for the information that Americans are now getting from these institutions that have been cut and have been, aligned more with their owners' politics?
Well, it's less reliable, it's less credible, and you don't really know what to make of it, right? And it definitely feeds into the right-wing attack on the credibility of journalism. So I think it hurts the entire industry overall. As for the individual publications and networks, one thing it's meant is a lot fewer journalists have jobs. And that's, I think, never a good idea, right? We've just seen so many people lose their jobs in the last however many years, particularly with newspapers, disappearing left and right. But, Barry Weiss has had, I think, at least 3 rounds of layoffs at CBS News. That's, journalists walking out the door, not on their own. And then she's kicked a few out. So that's a problem too.
Yeah. So the right wing has launched, I think, a very successful campaign for the last 50 years, this drumbeat that the media is liberal and it needs a course correction. And, most people, by and large, I think, subscribe to that idea to some extent. And so they may not see the drift that's been happening with a lot of our mainstream media institutions, as much as you and I who have worked in them and know that when we're making decisions on news coverage, I mean, the politics of your editor never weigh in. It's always, what's the story? What are the facts? How can we tell this in a compelling way? That's how the news works, or how it should. But, I am wondering, Jennifer, nowadays, do people even want, straight down the middle news? Because a lot of people turn to influencers on Instagram and TikTok, that they have a perspective one way or another. There's certainly a lot of figures on the right. You've written extensively about Nick Shirley, who kind of kicked off the hysteria in Minnesota over alleged fraud with daycare institutions, and it became just a national firestorm that Trump and Republicans have dined out on for a while. But there's an audience for this. People want to get their news from influencers. And so is there even a market now to just give people just the facts news?
Well, that is a heck of a question. And if I was the one that had the answer to it, boy, journalism's in a world of hurt. And I'm not sure that we know what people want. I think we see what's available to them and what they're clicking on. Is that what they want, or is that what they're stumbling across? There's so many things that have changed about how information is coming at people. I'm not sure if you actually sat down and said to somebody, if you had a chance to have this, would you take it? Oh, I didn't know that existed. We do know local news is still the most popular and respected vehicle for information that there is. Now, those numbers have slid, but not nearly as much as national news has. An interesting fact that I've had people argue with me about, but most people still get their local news from local TV broadcasts. And so it's shrinking, but there still is a considerable audience who is tuning into their local newscast to get local news. I just think that's amazing, because you might not know that given all of the other discussions around how journalism's in such trouble. But local news is hanging in there. It's in trouble too. I think people want information about their communities. I think we do have a sense of that. Are they being distracted by the churn, particularly from MAGA media and people pretending to be journalists? One of the things about Nick Shirley is he's a right-wing political guy, right? But he has all the trappings of journalism, the things that we've come to expect from journalists. And I think sometimes that's confusing to people. Well, he's walking and talking like a news reporter. He's got a camera. He's mimicking reporting. And that's been happening for a while. I mean, he's not the first, right? And I think that confuses people, because there is something, people are trained, right, to see the people sitting on the news set, to see the reporter out in the field. They know what that looks like and what that has meant over time. Bad actors, if you want to think of them that way, and I do, they've taken a lot of that and tried to make it their own. And I think that they come at it, what they're doing then, with a little bit extra credibility that they have not earned.
Yeah. Well, I know you just wrote a piece about some of these local TV mergers that are going on around the country. There is the current merger that's out there with Nexstar and Tegna, and they own dozens of TV stations, often in the same markets. I come from the print world, and so I've been used to seeing a lot of, especially weeklies, close all across the country.
Mhm.
It used to provide this local coverage, but even bigger papers have been going under for years. I think it's a bit of a wake up call to see when you actually have like TV affiliates that may be disappearing. So can you talk with us about what the landscape looks like there?
Well, a friend of mine told me that they had seen some research that said that local TV news was about 10 years behind newspapers. And as most people know, the newspaper business in the United States has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. We just thousands of jobs lost, newspapers closed, newspapers merged, many of them taken over by big companies, like the Chicago Tribune here where I am, a dominant newspaper, bureaus all over the world. It's the same story. And now as part of Alden Capital, they're basically working out of a storefront somewhere with a handful of people. And I do want to say, shout out to the Tribune for its Pulitzer this week for local news for astounding coverage of the ICE invasion here in Chicago. We are lucky we still have a very robust local news environment in Chicago, and many news outlets, including Block Club Chicago and the Chicago Sun-Times, did remarkable coverage, but the Tribune won a Pulitzer for just an incredible body of work. Back to local TV. What's happening in local TV is they're having the same pressures that newspapers had. The advertising was how they paid the bills.
Right.
And, that's vanished, along with the audience going to social media and, watching the Nick Shirleys of the world, right? And so the advertising has just fallen, the bottom's fallen out on that. And along with the people changing their viewing habits, local TV news has had to adjust, and a lot of them have. They're doing things on YouTube. They're doing things, they're trying to find viewers where they are.
Right.
But it's a tough business. So there are hardly any independently owned TV stations right now. There's about 5 groups that own all of the television stations in the country. And the largest of them is Nexstar, which owns the TV station where I used to work, WGN TV, and owns over 200 TV stations, and then now wanting to merge with Tegna, and would end up having, I think, 256 television stations if the merger is approved. A lot of people are fighting it, and so it may not go through, and covering 80% of the country. Well, what happens when those mergers go through? And we just saw this in Indianapolis with a different company bought a TV station. So it has a TV station in the market already. It bought another one.
Mm-hmm.
It closed that television station overnight. The news staff was actually doing the news, and people were being pulled out of the newsroom during the newscast and being told they were fired. And by when that 6 o'clock news ended that day, 50 plus people had lost their jobs, and the local news outlet on that station vanished. Now it's bubbled back up a little bit, but it's mostly being supplemented by the other station in town that the owner owns. Mm-hmm. That is the threat across the country, particularly if Nexstar is successful in buying Tegna. They have overlapping TV stations, I think, in 35 different markets. And they will not keep them all open. Mm-hmm. They will close them. Along with this, the other thing that's happening is that local weather is shrinking. And I think that's a big concern for people too. As the news departments close and TV stations are trying to figure out the economics, they are toying with getting rid of the local weather forecaster. And weather is the most popular thing on local TV news, Susan. Yeah. So viewers are not going to be happy about that.
Yes. But, when I look on YouTube, I can find 5 amateur meteorologists in the
Oh,
land
I hate that.
that will tell me allegedly if a tornado is coming, and they're broadcasting, they have their microphones and all that. And while this perhaps may not be as damaging as Nick Shirley out there
Oh, I think it's
flying
cool.
with the microphone, but I mean, whether you depend on weather for your public safety, especially during spring storms here in the Midwest. And so this really is not a place that you want to be listening to people with no training. And as so Jennifer, I want to talk to you. I mean, on one hand, it's great that we have more people who are interested in giving people information, and there's been somewhat of a democratization of the news.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you do learn things when you go to journalism school about how to present information fairly and accurately, and what sources you should rely on, for expert opinions. And so what do we do when that system is in the process of breaking down so thoroughly? And people, a lot of people are getting their information from Joe Rogan's podcast as opposed to their local TV station. What does that mean for our grasp on facts in our country when that is rapidly becoming the case?
Well, it's no good, that's for sure. Well, I think that one of the challenges is that the people who do have the credibility and training and experience need to keep reinforcing that and telling people. I think one of the things that journalists have not done over maybe the last 10, 20 years is show their work, explain how they do things, let people see how the sausage is made, talk about your credentials. If you're a meteorologist, say that, explain what that means. And we are seeing more of that, but not enough. And it should be, everyone should be doing it, show people how you do what you do. Because you are competing now with, bad actors and fakes and wannabes. And I'm not suggesting that everybody has a ulterior motive here to mislead people, but a lot of people do. I would not get my weather alert information from a YouTube weather guy. I'm sorry, but that seems just ridiculous to me. But think of the time we're in, Susan. People are getting medical advice from RFK Jr.
Right.
So, watching the YouTube weather guy doesn't seem like a stretch, does it?
Right. Especially if he's entertaining.
Right. So expertise is all under attack. What do we do about that? We have to just share our credentials, explain how we do the work, lean into the fact that you are an expert. I'm not buying this, expertise is out the window. I mean, didn't Tony Tocopel, like the couple days before he took over the CBS News, he said, we're not going to rely on the experts. We're going to talk to you. Well, I'm sorry, Tony. I want an expert to tell me what's happening in Iran, not Tom Cotton's former staffer. Thank you very much. I think we need to lean into the expertise. Don't be afraid of it. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's a big hill to climb, I think.
Yeah. It strikes me as being just an extremely cynical play by, folks like Barry Weiss at CBS News, where they're saying, oh, you don't need to listen to experts. But meanwhile, these are by and large people who have Ivy League degrees.
Right.
I mean, they might be saying, oh, you don't need college. But of course, for them and for their children, they're still following.
Right.
And it seems very much like, not to pick on CBS News too much, but there's just, there's been a change there. And so it's easier to kind of look at a before and after, where they kind of got together and like, Americans are a bunch of dummies. So let's just do news for dummies. And we're smart enough to know this. And there seems to be an inherent condescension there. And just, also from the Trump administration as well, where he stands up there and says, gas has never been lower. I mean, that's really insulting your audience because, of course, anyone who's been to a gas station knows that you're paying far more now with the Iran war than you were a year ago or before Trump was president. And so, you know, I know that one of Trump's selling points has always been that he connects with regular people and he understands how to entertain people. But at some point, it's just not very entertaining if people treat you like you're idiots and lie to you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I agree with you. And again, I think that leaning into expertise and credibility is actually the path forward. We want to know. Back to weather. I mean, I just think it's one of the most significant things that impacts people's everyday lives, particularly now. I mean,
Right.
back the Pulitzers, there were countless news organizations that won Pulitzer Prizes because of their coverage of extreme weather.
Right. Like
Extreme
that.
weather is everywhere, every day. It impacts all of us. We do not want goofballs, telling us the wrong thing. We also don't want a National Weather Service that is stripped, by Doge and Donald Trump because they want to spend money, give somebody a tax cut, I guess. I don't know. But expertise is actually a good thing.
Yeah.
And let's not be afraid of that. Let's share it. I mean, there's a way not to be a jerk about it, right? But I even to have these conversations with my own family. And
Mhm.
I've been in journalism. I went to journalism school. I've been in journalism for a long time. I still have to have the conversation that says, okay, this is how we look at stories. No, my personal opinion is not a part of that, we need to explain what journalism is, why facts are good, why why we do what we do, and maybe people will start to listen. I mean, I do worry about people who are getting so much bad information. The health stuff that's out there on the internet. Oh my God, it's terrifying. And we used to have in journalism at newspapers and local TV, everybody used to have a health reporter.
Right.
And reporting on health news and medical news was a really big thing. That's also gone away with all this shrinkage.
Yeah.
Boy, do we need it now. We
Yeah.
really need some more eyes on all of this stuff and helping people figure it out rather than some nut with a TikTok.
Right. And we saw that during the pandemic where there were a lot of places where they had cut their health reporter. And so a lot of the coverage ended up being political coverage of the pandemic. Yes, there was a side of that, especially when Donald Trump was president and he was fighting with governors about PPE. There were definitely political stories to be told. And I was running a political publication at the time, and we told that story too. But luckily, I also had a reporter who was covering health policy and could talk with epidemiologists and could talk to you about what the science was behind wearing a mask, why this wasn't a political discussion. This was just in terms of your health. And, that's just not something that every outlet has. And, when you reduce everything down to a culture war, you are really missing so much of the story, which is just giving people basic information that they need to survive for their lives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm sad to see that was not one of the lessons that we seem to learn from the pandemic, because we have one of the biggest vaccine deniers in the country setting our health policy as, Secretary of Health and Human Services.
Mm-hmm.
But Jennifer, I did want to go back a little bit to what you were talking about, that local news is still so important and trusted among people, because one of those 5 corporations that does own a lot of stations across the country is Sinclair, which is pretty much the Fox News of local news. And they own stations all across the country. And they actually, their approach is pretty explicit. I mean, they really have pro-Trump commentary is like a requirement as part of their local broadcast. And, for a lot of people, it's just like, well, this is the Channel 7 news. So, you're not making that distinction. They may never turn on Fox News, but they want to hear what's going on in their community. And this has been going on for, a long time and has really shaped local news in a lot of areas. It's certainly this is a company that, Donald Trump has, some of his former staffers have worked for Sinclair. What kind of impact does that have on the information that people are getting?
Well, it's devastating in these local communities. Sinclair owns 177 television stations, and they also wanted Tegna. So if the Nexstar merger falls through, you can expect Sinclair to come after the Tegna stations. The problem with Sinclair, and frankly, and Nexstar, is that they own network affiliates across the board. So Sinclair has 177 stations. It's got about 30 ABC stations. It's got CBS stations, NBC stations, and Fox stations. Except for Fox, when it does the local news, the credibility of that brand, the ABC, is what's up front. I would bet you that most people do not know who owns their local TV station, so they don't know for sure that Sinclair is, in there in the content. And instead, the information that's coming out to the local viewer is coming under this umbrella of NBC. Let's say NBC, right? Which would have a lot of credibility with people,
right?
And so it's sneaky in that way. It's like, you're putting out this partisan stuff, but you're doing it under the NBC umbrella. And so viewers are like, maybe that's true. It's
right.
not. It's not. The other thing that Sinclair does is they have must-run programming. So they have what they call the National Desk, and they produce these very partisan, filled with disinformation and misinformation stories that then they farm out to all 177 television stations, and they are must-runs. And they've been doing this for years, and it's only getting worse. Because now they've actually closed some local newsrooms at stations they own, and instead of running a single local news broadcast on those stations, the stations are now running a complete National Desk broadcast, which is an entire half hour of this dreck. It's really insidious. And I always say, find out who owns your local TV station. It's easy to do. Call them up and ask them. And then watch the program. You may know the anchors and they may be familiar to you, but I think you also want to know where a lot of the content that they're sharing with you is coming from. And if you don't like it, tell them. Tell their advertisers that you don't like it. Viewers have power. It's not just, you could switch off for sure, but you could also call and say, you know what? I didn't like that. That wasn't a well done story. It wasn't balanced. And I think it wasn't true. You could say that and tell them. But talking to the advertisers in your local community and saying, you know what? Why are you advertising alongside that? I don't like that. That has a huge impact. But find out who owns your local station and make a decision about who you are watching, who you are giving your eyeballs to, based on, knowing a little bit more about them. I think that would be a smart play.
Well, Jennifer, you mentioned some good news with the Chicago Tribune winning the Pulitzer, and we definitely want to talk about some of the wins that are out there, because there are so many things to criticize about the media. And certainly, you and I are no stranger to doing that. But are there any other news outlets or reporters who've been doing some really good work lately that we should talk about? Because, a lot of times it can be a very thankless job for people in journalism.
Yeah, and there's actually so much content, it's easy to miss the good stuff that's going on out there. Just this week, I've read 2 stories that really jumped out at me. One I read this morning by Ashton Pittman of Mississippi Today, where he did this deep dive into how Mississippi moves polling places with some regularity, particularly in Black communities, and doesn't tell people. So then when they come to vote, they're in the wrong place and they can't find out where the polling place has been moved. It's an exceptional piece. It goes into great detail about what's going on in Mississippi, but looks at what's happening in other states that's different and might be a guide for Mississippi if it chooses to fix this problem. I read another amazing story this week by, and the reporter's name just went out of my head, but at the Texas Tribune, about the Southern Baptist Convention and the sex abuse scandal there and their role in right-wing politics. And it was just exceptional, an exceptional piece. I'm sorry, I can't remember the reporter's name, but there is so much good work out there. And I do think it is hard to find it sometimes, particularly if you're not a regular subscriber or viewer. But I'm always heartened by these really good deep dive stories. They're still being done. You just have to work a little bit harder to find them. I try to highlight them on my Blue Sky account because I feel like I do complain about the media a lot, and I try to balance that with when I see people that are doing really excellent work.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that work is being done at the local level, at the state level, and a lot of those reporters are doing such great work for little recognition and little pay. And so, you know, I was heartened to see that Julie K. Brown was finally honored with a Pulitzer because she was kind of the lone voice out there in the wilderness who wouldn't let the Epstein story go at a time when so many other people did. And she kept plugging away at it for a couple different outlets. And, you know, she followed the money, she followed the incredibly powerful people that were involved in this web. And, you know, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that it's her reporting that really helped keep this story alive and helped try and bring some justice for so many people who had been denied it for so long. So that's a real testament to the power of doing that kind of important journalism and kind of going against the grain on stories that others, you know, may not be pursuing.
Oh, the Julie K. Brown effort, you're absolutely right. We would not be where we are today, I don't believe, if she had not done that groundbreaking work in 2017, 2018, where she found 70 victims and published this explosive series of pieces about it. And it brought it all back, and it's built from there. She's a remarkable reporter who isn't stopping. I mean, she's just nonstop. And we're all benefiting from her continued hard work.
Absolutely. Well, Jennifer, I appreciate you taking time to talk with us today. It's always so great to get your perspective on someone who, as somebody who has spent so many years in journalism and still has hope for what it can be.
I do. Thank you so much, Susan. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you.